Primitive reflexes are movement patterns that babies make that help to mature the central nervous system. If you have a child who has poor emotional regulation, has lots of tantrums, or is very controlling, bullying, then often that comes from a place of not feeling safe in the world. There comes a point where those reflexes won't integrate, but what you can do is follow a movement program and really calm them down. The best thing for babies to encourage their reflexes to integrate is to...
Today's guest is Niki McGlynn from the UK, who is a homeopath as well as doing primitive reflex integration and training and ADHD coaching. You can find more information about Niki at organizedmind.co.uk. That's organized mind with a S. I absolutely loved today's episode, and I had no idea how primitive reflexes relate to so many things in our daily lives. And I really encourage our listeners, if you found value from today's episode, please forward it to family and friends who you think can benefit from this episode as well. And let's help to raise awareness of how primitive reflexes could be an underlying reason for some of the things that we might be experiencing in life that we're not sure why that's happening. So thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Homeopathy Hangout Podcast, where we discuss all things homeopathy from around the world. And now our mum and your host, Eugenie Kruger.
Hello, homies, and welcome back to Homeopathy Hangout. We have got a lovely guest on today from Organised Mind called Niki McGlynn. Welcome to the podcast, Niki.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
It's lovely to have you on. I'm really excited to have a chat with you because primitive reflexes, I don't know, it's probably been a buzzword for ages, but I feel like it's a little bit more of a buzzword at the moment because I'm just seeing it more on socials. Our lovely chiropractor that works here has just recently done some training, so he's talking about primitive reflexes. I'm wondering if that could be some underlying things maybe for myself and for my kids. So I'm excited to dive into today's episode. But apparently you've listened to the podcast before, so you know the drill.
Yeah.
Tell me how you first were introduced to homeopathy.
So my journey into homeopathy was probably slightly unconventional. The first experience I had with homeopathy was my son had eczema and my GP referred me through the NHS to see a homeopath, and he prescribed some remedies for him and he took the remedies and his eczema went away, and I never gave it a second thought. And then a couple of years later, I was pregnant with my daughter. I had hyperemesis and my health visitor suggested I see a homeopath. So that wasn't through the NHS. That was a, have you thought about seeing a homeopath? So, because I'd taken all the drugs by that point. And I went to see a homeopath, and first remedy didn't do anything. Second remedy didn't do anything. And finally I was sat in her room and I said to her, the weirdest thing happened to me the other day. I suddenly got this craving for a cigarette. And she went, oh. And then she looked up tobacco in her Materia Medica and showed me and gave it to me while I was sat in the consultation room. And over the course of the consultation, the morning sickness went away and never returned. And I was 8 months pregnant by that point. So I just thought, this is amazing. And then stuff happened in my life and I needed to look at a new career. And I said to my homeopath, I'm thinking of going into teaching or possibly something like this. And she gave me a leaflet for the Society of Homeopaths. And then I went to Purton House and had an interview and got accepted. And that was that, really.
I love that. That's the thing with the UK. I think people are much more open to homeopathy there because the royal family uses homeopathy and Prince Charles is in the news every...
were.
Oh,
I think they were.
Do things going backwards?
Yeah, because I went to college in 2000 and that was just at the point where Ben Goldacre and the whole sense about science thing and bad science thing was taking off and starting to really get some traction. So I started training as a homeopath just as it started to kind of fall out of favour. So unfortunately.
Well, it's definitely back in favour at the moment from, what I'm seeing and people asking everywhere. But how cool that, it can be done through the NHS. I mean, not anymore though, but hopefully it'll
Not
go that
anymore,
way
but
again.
maybe it'll come back. But yeah, I think there's still homeopathic hospitals. I'm not quite sure quite where we stand at the moment with the NHS and homeopathy. But yeah, I was very lucky to have been able to access that. That was in probably 97, 98, I was referred. So
amazing. Also, good on your homeopath for actually curing your hyperemesis or hyperemesis, because that's one of the things I find really hard to treat. I've been able to help clients like kind of reduce the intensity of it, but not actually been able to completely cure it. I don't know, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but I've used so many different remedies and even out the box remedies like HCG and hormone impotency, the pregnancy
yeah,
hormone and
yeah,
placenta and,
yeah,
sepia, obviously, symphoric carpus, like all these ones that people are like, this
yeah,
is the
yeah.
one. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But actual hyperemesis or hyperemesis is, yeah, can be quite tricky. And the drugs they put you on is some sort of like chemo drug that's like an anti-nausea that's often used
It
for,
was, yeah, I had a number of anti-sickness drugs, and then I saw a different GP who went, "Why are you taking all that medication?" It's
yeah.
like, well, I don't know.
I think it's
But
called a
I tried
danzatron.
acupuncture, that didn't work.
Mm.
Pretty much everything else, nothing worked, and homeopathy was the only thing that worked.
Yay. At 8 months, at least that, because usually with hyperemesis, they doesn't stop until the baby comes out. So at least you got the last little
For
month.
a month.
Well, talk to me about primitive reflexes and especially dyslexia. So my daughter and my husband have Irlen, which is like a type of
Oh, right,
dyslexia.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And we've had Jan Blair on the podcast talking specifically about Irlen. But, the thought that primitive reflexes could be an underlying thing is actually quite
Yeah,
incredible. Maybe tell us, what is primitive reflexes? That might be a good place to start, and we'll kind of build on
okay.
it from there.
Okay, so primitive reflexes are movement patterns that babies make that help to mature the central nervous system. So they're movement based. And if for any reason those movements aren't able to be fulfilled, or there's a genetic component, or earlier reflexes are retained, so subsequent reflexes can't develop, then those reflexes become retained or stuck in the system. And those reflexes all have mental, emotional, and physical components, which is why I love it as a homeopath, because it sits alongside homeopathy so beautifully in that whole mental, emotional, physical, proper, holistic mind-body connection. And because they're movement patterns, you can use movement to encourage them to integrate.
So is it ever too late to try and integrate primitive reflexes?
No, you can work on integrating reflexes at any age. So from babies who have had a tricky delivery, all the way through to quite elderly. My oldest client was 76. There comes a point where those reflexes won't integrate, but what you can do is follow a movement program and really calm them down so that they are much less active. And then often you have to continue doing a movement program sort of kind of forever. But it doesn't take very long. It's very quick, it's easy, and it's movement rather than exercise. So with children, you can do a new movement program, encourage those reflexes to integrate, then they just go off and get on with their lives. But with adults, it needs to be a bit more of a long-term project.
Oh,
You can do
cool.
bed a lot of the time.
Wow. You've just triggered a memory in me. When my son was probably about 1, I went to like a little play group at the library, and somebody was saying about this child, and now that you mentioned that they had dyslexia, and the mum was like, well, you can just get them to crawl because that helps to kind of cross it over. And actually, that was the first time I think I'd heard about that, but never really looked into it further than that.
There's
Like
lots of dyslexic children don't crawl because dyslexia, dyspraxia, and dyscalculia are generally associated with the neck reflexes. So there's 3 neck reflexes. There's your tonic labyrinthine neck reflex, which is about putting your head forwards and backwards, and your asymmetric tonic neck reflex, which is like side to side, like you're saying no to somebody, and your symmetrical tonic neck reflex, which affects your core, but it's still about head position in a baby. And if your tonic labyrinthine neck reflex or your asymmetric tonic neck reflex aren't integrated, then your symmetrical tonic neck reflex can't integrate properly. And your symmetrical tonic neck reflex is the reflex that allows you to crawl. So when a baby goes on all fours and does that rocking backwards and forwards thing, that is it trying to integrate its symmetrical tonic neck reflex. Now, if you go on all fours and you feel unstable and that reflex isn't able to develop itself properly, then what babies do is sit on their bottoms and bottom shuffle, or stand up at 9 months and walk or run, because babies don't walk at 9 months. And those neck reflexes are particularly associated with processing issues as well as lots of other issues.
Oh, cool. What sort of other reflexes are there? Like, I'm just trying to think. I want to make sure that we get like the best juice out of this. So let's maybe talk first to a mum with like a little kiddie. Like, what sort of things should
Well, should we just talk about Irlen's first? Well, because you
Okay,
mentioned
yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So Irlen syndrome is about where light hits the back of the eye. Okay. And that's very strongly associated with the Moro reflex. So the Moro reflex is probably the only reflex anybody's ever heard of. It's the baby startle reflex. Yeah, that one. Yeah. So, and what that does, as well as creating this movement pattern of throwing your head back and your arms and legs back and gasping, is it dilates your pupils. So if your pupils are dilated, the light is hitting the eye in the wrong place. So often by working on the Moro reflex and encouraging the Moro reflex to integrate, the pupils then work properly. The light hits the back of the eye in the right place and the Irlen syndrome improves.
That's really cool. So do I need to frighten my husband and daughter a bit more?
No, the
Okay.
opposite.
Okay. Damn. That could have been fun.
If they leap out of their skin every time you make them jump, that's a retained Moro reflex.
Which is also interesting because I know with my husband, because his pupils are larger to let more light in because of the Irlen's, he's also more susceptible to migraines. So it's, just really interesting. What sort of let's talk now to the mums who have little bubbies. Like what sort of things should they be looking out for so that they can make sure kind of all the reflexes are integrated? And maybe we can kind of build our way up from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's primitive reflexes fall into kind of 4 categories. And primitive reflexes acts as a sort of umbrella term. So you have uterine reflexes, which the one we're particularly interested in is the fear paralysis reflex. Proper primitive reflexes, which start in the womb and then should integrate over the first year or so of life. Transitional reflexes, which develop after birth and integrate, and postural reflexes, which develop after birth and don't integrate. So you want postural reflexes because they're the things that help keep you upright. And then because a lot of these reflexes develop in the womb, a lot of them are associated with the birthing process. So the Moro reflex, for instance, is your first breath of life. So it's your first gasp. The tonic labyrinthine neck reflex that we talked about in relation to eczema, it has 2 parts to it, a forwards and backwards part. So the forwards part is the normal position a baby's in the womb, or that curled up position. And the backwards part is as the baby's being born, as it comes out of the birth canal and puts its head back, that's your tonic labyrinthine neck reflex. And then as it turns to get out of the birth canal, that's your asymmetric tonic neck reflex. And as it wriggles down the birth canal, that's your spinal galant reflex. So a lot of them are associated with the birthing process. So if you've had a tricky birth, so if you've had a cesarean section or an assisted delivery or a really long slow delivery or a really rapid delivery, that can be mechanically where problems arise. So that's kind of what you need to look out for. Or if you've had a very stressful pregnancy, that can then cause problems with reflexes integrating. The 2 fear reflexes, the fear paralysis reflex and the Moro reflex, act as a sort of a gateway to the other reflexes. So if you've had a very stressful pregnancy or a very stressful delivery, those reflexes can interfere with the other reflexes developing and integrating. So the best thing for babies to encourage their reflexes to integrate is to put them on their tummies as much as possible. Put them in a sling, and an inward facing sling, not an outward facing sling, as much as possible, and do that baby wearing thing. That's really good. And play with your baby like you would normally. Don't put them on an iPad.
Yeah.
A lot of nursery rhymes that we do with babies and young children are associated with reflex integration. So all the rocking backwards and forwards and round the garden on the hands is hand reflexes, and this little piggy went to market is foot reflexes. So all of those games that we play with children help to encourage reflex integration.
Oh, that's lovely. Amazing. And then, so by what age should all of the reflexes be integrated? Is there like an age?
Well, it depends on which reflex you're looking at. Some of them should be integrated fairly early, and some of them, the tonic labyrinthine neck reflex and the Landau reflex, don't integrate until about age 2 to 3, the backwards part. But on the whole, they should be integrated by around about a year to 18 months. And the thing about reflexes is that, like I said, they have physical, mental, and emotional components. So you can identify retained primitive reflexes through physical testing. So if your reflexes are well integrated, you can move any part of your body without another part of your body having to get involved. So you can move your head without your arms or your legs having to get involved. So that's really how we test reflexes, is to see what happens when you're testing them. But also you can look at what kind of issues people come with. So if you have a child who has poor emotional regulation, has lots of tantrums, or is very controlling, bullying, then often that comes from a place of not feeling safe in the world. So that's associated with fear reflexes. So I would immediately be looking at the Moro reflex for those kinds of children. And if you're looking at somebody who comes with dyslexia, dyspraxia, I'd be looking at neck reflexes. If we're looking at somebody with ADHD or those really restless type symptoms, I'd be looking at the spinal gland reflex. But often you can have a whole host of reflexes retained. So it's better to work on the central nervous system holistically rather than just pick apart each reflex. That often concerns me when I see people who have gone, there was somebody on a Facebook group the other day saying, these are all the problems and I'm working on the symmetrical crotonic neck reflex. Well, symmetrical crotonic neck reflex is a transitional reflex. The other neck reflexes have to be integrated. So working on that reflex isn't going to be particularly helpful.
Interesting. You know how you just mentioned that, moving your head without another part of your body moving. What sort of other, and you mentioned, ADHD, dyslexia, that sort of stuff. What sort of other physical signs might people have to alert them to the fact that maybe they should look into primitive reflexes?
So problems with balance and coordination are big indicators, because anything that involves moving the head or not moving the head will affect your vestibular system. That affects your balance. So the fear paralysis reflex is all about shutting down and withdrawing and not moving. So where you've got physical issues around not being able to get involved. So things like selective mutism is a fear paralysis thing, because actually, however much you might want to talk, you can't. Your vocal cords won't work. And then if you're looking at things like, falling off chairs or falling over easily or not being able to balance, then that could be the Moro reflex, because there's head involvement in the Moro, or any of those neck reflexes we've already talked about. And they also will affect things like hypermobility, because the wrong information is going to the joints and muscles and coming back from the joints and muscles. So not hypermobility necessarily with things like Ehlers-Danlos loss, but sort of just somebody's a bit hypermobile, and that can be then improved. But then that being said, people with Ehlers-Danlos loss can also improve their hypermobility by looking at reflex integration. So it can be a bit circular. But yeah, I mean, neck, back, shoulder problems, bedwetting beyond the age of 5, digestive issues. There's all sorts of things that are related to reflex integration. And of course, the fear reflexes also drastically affect your immune system. So allergies, asthma, eczema, things like that, general autoimmune conditions, POTS. We see a lot of teenage girls with POTS. So POTS is a fear paralysis issue where the blood pressure will just drop, because there's a lot of vagus nerve involvement with those fear reflexes as well.
POTS also very common in teenage girls after the HPV vaccine, but we won't talk about that. You have just mind blown emoji me about the hypermobility, because I see so much hypermobility and I have been wondering, where is this coming from? Why are all these people saying they're hypermobile? But also the bedwetting, past 5, I see a lot of that. And I did not think to look at primitive reflexes. Interesting.
So this is why I'm so grateful to be on your podcast, because it just gives you another avenue to look down.
Yeah.
So late bedwetting is a spinal gland issue. Urinary incontinence generally can be a spinal gland issue. I was teaching a course in Bath a couple of years ago, and I had a lady who because when you come on a course, we demonstrate on each other. We had a lady that we were working on the spinal gland with, and she came in the next day and she said, "This might be too much information, but last night I went home and I sneezed and I didn't wet myself for the first time in 30 years." So there's that whole sort of teaching the body again how to process things as it should.
Well, I can clearly see now how homeopathy would be a beautiful adjunct for you in clinic, because when you're talking about the fear response, we can use our remedies alongside you using these exercises to integrate, and you can use your bedwetting remedy or your causticum for the, pelvic floor alongside this.
Yeah, and
You must have a great time integrating these two with each other. It must be so fun.
It's so interesting, and I think that because the two work together really well. So one of the issues I have with working with adults, I see the majority of adults I see have got retained fear reflexes, so they come with anxiety or issues around that. Now, one of the big things about being very anxious is that change is really scary. So if you start doing a movement program and things start to change, then you forget to do the movements, or you can't be bothered, or you forget to come for your follow-up. So there's all that sort of, what people refer to as self-sabotage. I don't really like that term, self-sabotage, because it's really about the system trying to keep itself safe. So change is a really scary thing. Your system is already under stress because you spend your whole life in a world that doesn't feel safe. Things start to change, so that makes you feel less safe. So then you go, right, okay, so subconsciously I need to keep things the same in order to try and make myself feel safer. So that's where things like homeopathy can be really, really helpful, because you can deal with that underlying fear whilst also somebody's following a movement program. So it just allows the process to happen, and the movements and the homeopathy support each other. Similarly, if I have somebody who comes for homeopathy and I can clearly see there's reflex stuff that needs doing, I can give them, a couple of movements to do at home, even if it's just only hand and foot massage, or, to do at home themselves or do at home with their child. And then that helps support the work of the remedies. And also it gives some of the power back to the parents, because I'm a great believer in allowing people to heal themselves and help themselves to heal. And by being able to do movements themselves or movements with their children themselves, kind of homework, then I think that can only be a positive thing as they then take more responsibility for their own health.
You are giving me goosebumps, because I feel exactly the same. And that's why I love homeopathy, because it puts the power back in the parents' hands to treat their family themselves. And with something like this, we have so many amazing practitioners that we can go see regularly to do manual therapies and things on us. But if we can learn to do some of that ourselves, one, it saves time, it saves money, but most importantly, it puts the power back in our own hands. If you're going and live remotely or anything like that, and you can't go and see practitioners regularly, being able to have a therapy that you can do yourself is incredible.
Exactly. And it's simple, and, and I see a lot of SEN children, and a lot of those parents have been dismissed and criticised. And, we have this whole thing in the UK where parents have problems with their children and they're sent off to do a parenting course. Well, parenting courses are brilliant, not to disrespect that, but it's very disempowering for parents, because they're like, well, I've done a parenting course and my child is still bananas. What do I do? So it just empowers the parents to be parents. And it helps, because you're doing movements with your child, you're moving your child, or you're giving the child hand and foot massage. It helps build a relationship with that child again as well.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I think so much of that is to do now with how we bring our children up. Like I said to you, what can you do with your babies? Put them on their tummies, now, because we have this back to sleep campaign here, which was to try and deal with cot death, and dealt with cot death very successfully. But when your baby is constantly on its back, so it's on its back to sleep, and it's on its back in a car seat, and it's on its back and under a baby gym and in a baby bouncer, and so babies never get the opportunity now to lie on their tummies. And sometimes parents say to me, "Oh, my baby hates tummy time." Well, it's because it's unfamiliar, but babies need to be on their tummies, and if they hate tummy time, then lie them on their tummies on you, because when they're on their tummies and they're feeling safe, that allows those reflexes to integrate. So it allows that Moro reflex to integrate. Because if you're constantly on your back and constantly being startled, that reflex can't integrate. So that causes things like reflux and how many babies do we know with reflux?
Yeah.
And all these other problems. But being on its tummy allows that Moro reflex to integrate, allows the vagus nerve to develop properly. And when they're lying on their tummies, they can do that nod thing, which allows them to get proper control of their head, which then allows them to get proper control of their bodies, which then allows the whole process to develop as it should. So I don't think we have any more people who are neurodivergent, but I think the neurodivergence that we see is a lot more severe. So
it is, yeah.
Whereas before, a dyslexic brain is a dyslexic brain, an ADHD brain is an ADHD brain, autistic brain is an autistic brain. And those things should be celebrated, because neurodivergent people are the change makers, are the people who move us forward. That isn't going to happen if you're too anxious to leave the house, or your executive function is so poor, you can't organize yourself to get where you need to go, from school to work. So, and this is why I think reflex integration is so important now, because we can pick up those things that have been missed, allow people to function.
I'm so grateful that you've come on today, because I'm just like I'm going through my brain I'm definitely going to take my daughter to go see somebody over here and find out what is the reflex that has been integrated that's led to the Irlen, because I had, the most...
Moro. So Moro is...
But where would that... I wonder where that would have come from, because, it was a incredible vaginal home birth, incredible pregnancy. The whole birth was 4 hours at home, born on land. I went in the water, it slowed down, went on land, she came out. Lots of tummy time, did see a chiro, not that often, always baby wearing her. She slept on her side and my arms for the first 2 years of her life. So I didn't actually sleep on her back that much, because she was always on my, side breastfeeding, in bed. She had access to my boob whenever she wanted it. And I'm like, I don't know what else I could have, so many games, so much, it's interesting. And maybe there was a susceptibility, because obviously my husband has Irlen.
I was going to say, you've got that genetic susceptibility.
Yeah, but then where did that come from? Because maybe that was like an integrated. So maybe it's an ancestral Moro reflex that needs to be integrated.
Yeah, but that's not unreasonable, because when you think that, but miasmatically, we know we inherit things. So it's not unreasonable to think that these are also inherited tendencies.
Well, I have my mother-in-law and my father-in-law over tonight, so I'll have a chat with my mother-in-law and find out a bit more info.
Find out where they came from.
Luckily, she's awesome, so I don't mind chatting with her. So do you mind maybe sharing a little bit about you and your daughter's dyslexia journey? Because also it'll be interesting to know, to what extent can this be healed? If we have families listening with children with dyslexia at the moment, or maybe they have dyslexia themselves, to what extent can that be healed if you've integrated the reflexes?
Well, my daughter... I started working with my daughter. She was 12. She got her diagnosis. I was 40, got my diagnosis. And I'd had the most awful time through school. And both of us have subsequently been diagnosed with ADHD. So, and most people with ADHD have ADHD and something else. There's a sort of general neurodivergence issue there. So, but just talking about the dyslexia, that was really what sent me on my journey. And I did some work with her, and she passed her GCSEs, which was a miracle, really. But because she's my daughter, she didn't want to do it. So once we kind of got into
right.
that beyond that point, she was like, "No, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing that weird stuff you're doing, Mum." So
another few years' time, and she'll be like, "Oh, why didn't I listen to my mum?"
Well, we've done that. We've been there, but now she's at university, so we're not around to do any of the work. She's the same with homeopathy. Actually, she will rubbish homeopathy until she's not very well, and then she wants a remedy. So
I love it. I love it.
Always makes me laugh. Yeah, now she's doing proper nursing. So yeah, and I don't know anything.
Of course.
So
you're not alone. I think every parent right now is nodding in agreement.
Yeah, so it definitely helped her. It's definitely helped me. And one of the ways I've seen that it helped me, one of the really obvious, because things change subtly, but one of the really obvious things is going back to the neck reflexes. So this tonic labyrinthine neck reflex, which when you move your head forwards, your system feels like it wants to collapse. If you move your head backwards, it feels like it wants to hyperextend. So these are kids who, when they look down at their desk, kind of collapse on their desks. But also, it can give you a fear of heights. So because when you're high and you look down, you have the sensation that you're going to collapse and fall. So I had this quite strongly, and I really struggled to come downstairs because I would always get this feeling that I was going to fall. And I went over to Holland to teach a course, and I had to get off the plane, and I had a bag of manuals in each hand and a rucksack on my back. And I walked down the steps off the plane onto the tarmac, and I was walking across the tarmac, and I suddenly thought, I didn't have to hold on. I walked down the stairs without holding on. And that was really the sort of real big aha moment for me to really see the difference it made. So, but I have lots of children who come in who struggle with reading and writing. And in fact, I just had a text message from a mum who was saying to me that her son is now meeting all his milestones for reading and writing.
Wow.
And he was very much failing. So, and that's in about 3 or 4 months.
Wow. What about dysgraphia, really like bad handwriting? Is that a primitive reflex, or can that be?
Yeah, of course it is.
Okay. Yeah.
Because one of the issues with the neck reflexes is that they also control your eyes. So not the pupil dilation we're talking about for the Moro, but eye tracking. So if you have a retained asymmetric tonic neck reflex, so that's the neck reflex where you turn your head from side to side as if you're saying no. So if that reflex isn't integrated, tracking your eyes from left to right is really difficult. So one of the things I check for in a consultation is eye tracking and I check it so that parents can see eye tracking. Because if you can't smoothly move your eyes from left to right and back again, then reading is really, really difficult. It's exhausting and it's really hard. If you're reading a text message on a phone, you can do that because you don't have to move your eyes very much, or speech bubbles in comics because you don't have to move your eyes very much. But if you're moving your eyes across the page, it's really, really difficult. So that's sort of one of the really big changes that we can make. And then that same neck reflex, that asymmetric tonic neck reflex, the pattern of it in a baby, when that reflex is active as it should be, when you turn your head to the side you turn your head to, your arm extends and the opposite arm flexes and comes in. And the same happens with your legs. So the side you're turning your head to, the leg straightens and the opposite leg flexes. So if you are writing and you turn your head to the side, your arm wants to extend out to the side. So you have to hold it really tight to keep it on the page. And then you have to grip your pen really hard to keep it on the page. So then that is one of the reasons why people end up with terrible handwriting, is because the tension in the arm to keep that arm on the page is really, 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 really tough. And then also you have hand reflexes. So particularly the Babkin reflex, which is about your ability to let go of things, and your palmar grasp reflexes, which is about your ability to hold on to things. So if your palmar grasp reflex is active, then your palm is super sensitive. So that's when you get really odd pen grips, pencil grips, because when you hold your pen normally, your 2 or 3 lower fingers are tucked into your palm. And if that's really uncomfortable, you'll hold your pen awkwardly. So, and cutlery awkwardly. So those issues are all hand reflex issues.
I have a callus on my bottom finger, and I've always held my pen like this, and my teacher has always yelled at me, and I've still do that.
That's your palmar grasp reflex.
Okay.
On that and get it to integrate. So people who can't bear to have dirty hands, or they can't bear to have their palms touched, palmar grasp. And Babkin is all about being able to let go of things, and that's a really interesting remedy, because really interesting reflex, because that's all about peer relationships. And hoarding and hanging on to things, and people who are really insulted if you say something to them, but are really awful to other people. So, you can hear the remedies in that pattern. So,
holy moly. So I have not been able to do much, or let me be honest, any research on primitive reflexes. So I can't think of any clever questions to ask you. And I'm scared that you will say goodbye and then I didn't know a good question to ask you. So if you were maybe interviewed by somebody who did more research, what questions would you like them to ask you so that the listeners can get the most value out of this? Like or maybe what's like a common misconception about primitive reflexes?
Nobody's heard of primitive reflexes.
Yes, exactly. Okay, cool. It's not just me.
Nobody's heard of them. So, which is the joy of being able to do something like this and be able to talk about it, because people will now hear about it and, maybe go and look it up and go, well, that sounds like my child. And, maybe I can do something to help. So really and I think possibly one of the issues when people do know a bit about reflexes is this idea that, people don't view it holistically. So back to the symmetrical tonic neck reflex, where I mentioned somebody said, this is the reflex we're working on. And that's really the problem, is not really understanding how the central nervous system develops. And the symmetrical tonic neck reflex is a really, really easy reflex to spot because it has that sort of instability. So children who W sit, people who sit cross-legged on sofas or sit on their legs to try and increase their surface area with what they're sitting on, so they don't fall off, because this is sort of general sense of instability. So it's a very easy reflex to spot. So people go, oh, yeah, I can see you've got retained symmetrical tonic neck reflex. Let's work on that. But actually what you'd need to be working on is the tonic labyrinthine neck reflex, or asymmetric tonic neck reflex, or even to some extent a spinal gallant reflex, because they are your true primitive reflexes, and they are the ones that need to be integrated before we look at some of the later reflexes that develop.
So basically, from what I'm understanding from today, if you have any issues at all, or in fact, if you are breathing, then go and check your primitive reflexes.
This is the other thing I think is really interesting, is people who do breathing programs or people who do breathing exercises with their children to try and get them to calm down. If you've got a retained fear paralysis reflex, that's all about shutdown. So you get people who breathe very shallowly or people who breath hold. And the Moro reflex is that first gasp. So again, you get breath holding and irregular breathing. So if you then try and do breathing exercises with your child or yourself and those reflexes are retained, they will interfere with your ability to do those breathing exercises. So you're doing breathe in and hold your breath and breathe out. And it's not going to work. And in fact, it's going to make them more stressed and more anxious because they can't do it. So even something as simple as breathing is affected by primitive reflexes.
I'm so glad I said that. That's incredible. You just kind of made me think for a second about asthma as well. I mean, there's so many often underlying reasons for asthma, but I wonder if maybe looking at primitive reflexes could help to some degree.
Okay. Absolutely, because the fear reflexes interfere with your immune response.
Wow.
First of all, and then also they interfere with your ability to regulate your breathing. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you have a pulse, you should go and get your reflexes checked.
And they disproportionately affect neurodivergent people, but they can affect everybody. So, and they just affect our ability to move freely and live our lives. So.
Holy moly. So what sort of person should we go and see? Because I know some chiropractors are trying is there like a body, like a governing body worldwide that does this that you would recommend? Or like where would people, because you do in-person stuff. Do you do any online teaching?
No, no. Don't teach online because it's so much about. So you can learn about reflexes online, that's easy peasy. But when you're looking at doing movements to integrate, you need to feel it. You need to feel that person's central nervous system. You need to, you kind of need to feel that energy. They need to feel you. And when I'm teaching, I need to make sure that the people I'm teaching understand the movements and can understand about how to look for those small changes. And you just can't teach that online. Sadly.
Okay. So who would you recommend, like our worldwide listeners, who would you recommend they reach out to?
So really, the thing to do, I think the best way to do it is to go on local groups, local Facebook groups or local WhatsApp groups or whatever. Go on local groups and ask, because there'll be somebody who's been to see somebody who does reflex integration. And, it's that whole word of mouth thing. If somebody's gone to see somebody and they've had a good experience and then they're happy to recommend them, you're kind of halfway there. But there's loads and loads of different approaches to reflex integration. And my approach is based on rhythmic movement training, which one of the developers came from Australia, a lady called Moro, worked with a chap called Harold Blomberg and developed rhythmic movement training. And that's a really holistic approach. So that's really what I base everything on, and then add other things in as well. But there's that IMPP, which is based in the UK. There's MNRI, which is Russian in origin. There's Brain Balance, which is American chiropractor Robert Milelio. And
I've heard of him.
He's sort of the big noise on the street, really. But his work is based on INPP work, or the Institute of Human Potential in America. They did a lot of work together. So a lot of it's quite derivative. And then there's things like there's brushing, which I haven't seen to be massively successful. It seems to work up to a point. I see a lot of people who've done brushing and then come for movement work. And there's listening programs that can help with reflex integration. So there's lots and lots of different ways of looking for help. But if you search for primitive reflex integration or neurodevelopment, then you should be able to find somebody.
Oh, amazing. And so you guys in the UK are super lucky because you've got Niki McGlynn over there and can do training for you. And she'll actually come and do like private training for you if you can organize a venue and enough people and all that sort of stuff. So go to organizedmind.co.uk and then you've got a link on there where you've got the training. But, if somebody wants to fly you international, maybe put you up in a nice hotel, you can go and do some training for them. Hopefully somewhere with nice warm weather so you can get away from the UK.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, a bit of sunshine.
And nothing under 5-star hotel. Thank you. Amazing.
I just think this is really interesting. If you're a therapist of any discipline, it's so interesting and it gives you such an insight into people, and it's such a useful tool, and it makes such a difference to people. I'll pretty much go anywhere and talk to anybody about it.
Is there anything that we've missed that you really want to mention? Or is there any final message that you want to leave us with? And while you think about it, Niki is on Instagram as well, so you can also find her there, and on Facebook, Organised Mind, and you've got the website organizedmind.co.uk.
And it's organised with an S, not a Z.
Yes, UK, proper British English. Is there anything that we still need to mention, or any final thought that you want to leave our listeners with?
Oh, I don't know. I think probably the most important thing, for people to take on board, particularly this day and age, is move your body. So it doesn't have to be exercise. You don't have to go for a run. You just have to move your body. And that keeps us healthy. It keeps our brains healthy as much as it keeps our bodies healthy. And whether it's dancing or Tai Chi or yoga or mucking about in the park, moving your body is what you really, really need to do.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that, because on the 31st of January, I'm very excited. A friend of mine has organized a dance temple here in the local area that we're in. So I'm going to go to a dance temple every month, because that is my goal for this year, to dance a bit more and move my body a bit more. And I just got a message back today of a place that does Tai Chi around the corner. So thank you for that message, because that is my goal for this year.
Excellent.
Amazing. Hopefully I'll then learn how to hold my pencil properly, and my teacher will be so happy. All those years
I can give you a hand massage that you can do that'll help you hold your pencil.
Please. That'll be wonderful.
I'll send that over.
Niki, this has been one of the most valuable episodes that I have done in 400 plus episodes.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
No, thank you, because it makes so much sense what you're saying. You know, when somebody says something and it just goes, everything just lights up and there's a part inside of you that goes, yeah, this is like a fundamental truth. It makes so much sense. And I'm excited to see who we have. I know our Cairo here has just done some training on that, so I'm going to have more of a chat with him, but excited to be able to refer people to, practitioners around here. If you are in Perth and you do this and, reach out to me so I know who to refer to. But if you're in the UK, reach out to Niki, and I'm very jealous that you'll get to train with her personally. So,
Oh, come over, Eugenia. Come over and do the training.
It's on the agenda. The UK's on the agenda.
2
Don't
days.
worry. Yeah. Thank you so much, Niki. It was lovely to chat with you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.